the moment Marcus Webb walked out of that boardroom. Every person in that building knew the deal was dead. You could feel it. The way the air changed, the way the junior associates stopped typing and looked up from their laptops, the way the receptionist at the front desk pressed her lips together and reached for her phone. $1 billion acquisition. 3 years of negotiation, gone, because of 17 words buried on page 41 of a contract that nobody had bothered to read carefully enough. Nobody except one person. But we'll get to her. The Hargrove Hotel had stood at the corner of Michigan Avenue and East Wacker for 62 years. It wasn't the tallest building in Chicago. It wasn't the newest. But if you had been alive long enough to remember when that lobby floor was laid. White marble shipped in from Carrara, Italy, each tile hand selected by the original owner, a man named Elliot Hargrove, who believed that a hotel was not a building but a promise. Then you understood what it meant when people said the Hargrove had character. By the spring of that year, the Hargrove family had run out of money to keep that character alive. The pipes in the East Wing were original. The elevator in the North Tower needed a part that was no longer manufactured. The grand ballroom ceiling had a hairline crack, running from the chandelier to the north wall, that the structural engineer had been monitoring for 2 years. Monitoring, they called it. Like you could heal a building by watching it. Gerald Hargrove III, the grandson of Elliot, the son of Gerald Jr., the man who had inherited both the hotel and its debts, had finally made the decision that his father and grandfather had refused to make. He was selling. The buyer was a firm called Nakamura Capital Partners, headquartered in Osaka, with holdings across 14 countries. Their American liaison was a man named Philip Chen. 43, Harvard MBA, the kind of man who wore a watch that cost more than most people's cars, and spoke in a register that made everything sound like a final decision. He had flown in from New York for the closing. He was not accustomed to things not closing. The law firm handling the transaction occupied the 22nd floor of a glass tower, 3 blocks from the Hargrove itself. That morning, 12 people sat around a conference table that could have fit 20. There were water glasses, nobody touched. There were leather portfolios open to the same page. There were handshakes and pleasantries, and the particular kind of tension that lives in a room where everyone is pretending to be calm. Gerald sat at one end of the table. Philip Chen sat at the other. Between them were attorneys and accountants, and a woman named Cecilia from Gerald's side, who kept a yellow legal pad and wrote things down in handwriting so small it looked like code. Everything should have been finished within the hour. On the service level 2 floors below, a woman named Opal Tatum was folding linen. She had been folding linen, in one form or another, in that building for 23 years. She was 64 years old. She stood 5 feet 3 in her work shoes, which were the same sensible black shoes she had worn for the past 4 years because they were comfortable, and she had stopped caring about things that weren't comfortable a long time ago. Her uniform was pressed, always pressed, every morning, because her mother had told her when she was 7 years old that the way you present yourself tells people who you are before you open your mouth, and Opal had never forgotten it. Her name badge said Opal in block letters, nothing else. Just Opal. Most people on the upper floors did not know her name. Most people on the upper floors did not know she existed. She had raised 2 children in this city, her son Marcus, who now taught high school history in Detroit, and her daughter Renee, who had married a man Opal didn't particularly like, but had learned to tolerate because Renee was happy, and Renee being happy was the only thing that mattered. She had buried a husband 17 years ago. She had survived a breast cancer diagnosis 8 years after that, gone through 6 rounds of chemotherapy while still showing up to work 3 days a week, because the insurance was tied to her employment. And the bills did not pause for illness. She did not talk about any of this at work. There was no one to talk to, really. The younger staff moved in their own world, headphones in, phones in hand during breaks. The supervisors were kind but busy. Opal existed in the margins of the building, moving through service corridors and back stairwells, Invisible in the way that people who keep things running are always invisible. Essential and unseen at the same time. What people did not know about Opal Tatum, what nobody in that building had ever thought to ask, was that she had spent 21 years before coming to the Hargrove working as an administrative coordinator for a trade logist company that operated between the United States and Japan. For 11 of those years, she had worked directly under a man named Tomio Sasaki, who had moved from Osaka to Chicago in 1989, and who, in the early months of their working relationship, had made Opal an offer. "I'll teach you Japanese," he had said, "if you teach me how to make that cornbread you brought to the Christmas party." She had laughed. He had been serious. By her 4th year working with Tomio, Opal could read contracts in Japanese. Not perfectly. She would never claim perfection, but well enough. Well enough to catch things. Well enough that Tomio had started running documents past her before they went to the lawyers. Not because she was cheaper than the lawyers, but because she was faster. And she paid attention to the specific language in ways that felt personal rather than procedural. When the company downsized in 2001 and her position was eliminated, Opal had taken the first stable job she could find. The Hargrove had been hiring. The insurance was good. She had stayed. 23 years of folding linen. 23 years of being invisible. On the 22nd floor, things were beginning to fall apart. It had started with a question from Philip Chen's lead attorney, a woman named Stacy Park, who had flown in from the New York office specifically to review the contract language. She had a reputation for finding things, and she had found something. The question was about a clause on page 41, paragraph 7. It concerned the licensing agreement for the Hargrove name, the right to continue operating under the original brand identity after the acquisition. In English, the clause appeared straightforward. The seller granted perpetual rights to the name, standard language. But Nakamura Capital Partners had insisted, as they did with all their acquisitions, on parallel documentation in Japanese. It was a corporate policy. Every major contract came in both languages. And in the Japanese version of page 41, paragraph 7, the word perpetual had been translated using a term, mujin, that in standard legal Japanese carried an additional conditional modifier in formal business contexts, one that implied the rights were perpetual only if the hotel remained a hotel. A change in use, conversion to condominiums, for instance, or mixed-use development, which was precisely what Nakamura Capital Partners had been quietly planning, could void the licensing entirely. This was not a minor issue. If the Hargrove name license could be revoked upon a change in use, the entire brand acquisition was worth considerably less. Nakamura was not buying a building. They were buying a name, a legacy, a 6-decade reputation on Michigan Avenue. Without a clean license, the valuation crumbled. Philip Chen had read the Japanese version himself. He spoke Japanese, had studied it at university, used it in business for 20 years. He had read it and he had not liked what he read. "This term," he said, sliding the document across the table to Gerald's attorney, "this is not the same as what's in the English version." Gerald's attorney, a heavy-set man named Douglas, who had been doing real estate law for 30 years, and whose Japanese consisted entirely of sushi and Toyota, looked at the page and said nothing useful. "We'd need to have it reviewed by a translator," Douglas said. "I don't need a translator," Philip said flatly. "I'm telling you what it says." "With respect, Mr. Chen, our firm's position is that the English version governs." "Your firm's position," Philip said, and stood up. He was not a man who raised his voice. He didn't need to. The way he said those 3 words made the room understand that the conversation was over. He picked up his portfolio. He walked toward the door. Gerald Hargrove sat at the end of the table, looking like a man watching a house fire from the driveway. What happened next is not something that was planned. It is not something anyone could have anticipated or staged. It happened because of one thing and one thing only. The freight elevator on the service level was out of order that morning. which meant Opal had taken the back stairwell up to the 22nd floor to deliver a set of forgotten documents from building management to the law firm's receptionist. She was in the hallway, 10 feet from the conference room door, when that door opened and Philip Chen walked out. She stepped aside, the automatic, practiced step aside of someone who had spent 2 decades moving out of the way in hallways, and watched him pass. Behind him, through the open door, she could see the table, the documents, Gerald's face. Douglas standing helplessly with his hands on the back of a chair. She did not plan what happened next. Later, she would not be entirely sure why she did it. Maybe it was 23 years of invisible. Maybe it was the look on Gerald's face, the same look her son had worn at his father's funeral. That particular devastation of someone watching something slip away and not knowing how to stop it. Maybe it was simply that she had spent 64 years paying attention in rooms where nobody looked at her, and she knew exactly what she was looking at. She called out, "Sir." Philip Chen stopped. He turned slowly. He looked at her, uniform, name badge, Opal, with an expression that was not unkind but was not curious either. It was the expression of someone waiting to be told something so it could be politely declined. "The term you're concerned about," Opal said. "On page 41. He was very still. Mugen in that context, the full phrase as it's written in that document, carries the conditional. You're right about that." She paused. "But there's a counter clause. Paragraph 12. The Japanese version uses joken ni kakawara zu, which in formal business language means without regard to conditions. If that clause stands, it overrides the conditional in paragraph 7. The hallway was quiet. Philip Chen had been in international business for 20 years. He had sat across from prime ministers and sovereign wealth funds, and the kind of CEOs who had their own floors. He had in that time developed a very reliable instinct for when someone was bluffing and when someone actually knew what they were talking about. He looked at her for a long moment. "Read it to me," he said. Paragraph 12. Opal set down the folder she was carrying. She walked into the conference room without being invited, because nobody stopped her and she didn't wait to be stopped. She picked up the Japanese document from the table. 12 people watching, not one of them speaking, found page 41, moved to paragraph 12, and read it aloud. Her pronunciation was not perfect. It hadn't been for years, but the words were right, and the meaning was right. And when she finished, Philip Chen's expression had changed into something that she recognized, because she had seen it on Tomio Sasaki's face 30 years ago, on a Tuesday morning when she had caught a mistranslation in a shipping manifest that would have cost the company $400,000. It was the expression of someone recalibrating. He sat down. What followed was 3 hours that Douglas would later describe, in the parking garage, on a phone call with his paralegal, as the most humbling afternoon of my 30-year career. Opal stayed in that room. Nobody asked her to leave. Nobody, in the gravity of what was happening, thought to ask. Philip Chen moved through the Japanese version of the contract clause by clause, and when he reached a term or a phrase that carried nuance, the kind of nuance that a non-native speaker might hear correctly but not feel, not instinctively, he would look across the table, not at Douglas, not at Stacy Park, not at Gerald's team. He looked at Opal, and Opal would tell him what it meant. Not what the dictionary said. What it meant, the weight of the language, the way the phrase would land in a formal business context, the distinction between a soft conditional and a hard restriction. By 4 o'clock, the contract had been reviewed in full. The conditional clause in paragraph 7 and the override clause in paragraph 12 did in fact work together in the way Opal had said they would. The license was clean, the acquisition was solid. Gerald Hargrove III signed at 4:47 in the afternoon. Philip Chen signed 2 minutes later. When it was done, when the pens were capped and the portfolios were closed, and Douglas was shaking hands with people, and smiling the smile of a man who intended to never speak of this afternoon again, Philip Chen walked around the table to where Opal was standing near the window, preparing to pick up the folder she had set down 3 hours earlier. "How long have you worked in this building?" he said. "23 years," she said. He was quiet for a moment. Outside the window, Michigan Avenue moved in the way it always moved. Cabs and cyclists and people in coats walking fast toward wherever they were going. "That's a long time," he said. "It is," she said. He looked at her with the directness that she had noticed about him from the beginning. The man did not look away, did not soften the edges of his attention the way most people did. "What do you want?" he said. She thought that was a strange question. Then she realized it wasn't. "My grandson starts college in 2 years," she said. "He wants to study international business. He's bright. Brighter than he knows." Philip Chen reached into the breast pocket of his jacket and produced a business card. He held it out to her. "Have him call my office," he said. "Not email. Call." She took the card. He picked up his portfolio. He walked out. The morning after the signing, Gerald Hargrove III came down to the service level for the first time in his life. He found Opal at 7:15 a.m. in the linen room, folding fitted sheets with the practiced efficiency of someone who had done it approximately 40,000 times. He stood in the doorway for a moment, because he was the kind of man who had never quite learned how to walk into a room when he didn't know what to say. Opal looked up. "Mr. Hargrove," she said. "Gerald," he said. "Please," she nodded, went back to the sheet. He walked in. He stood near the shelving unit. He looked like a man in the wrong building, which in a certain sense he was. "I owe you an apology," he said. She smoothed a corner of the sheet. She did not say, "Oh no, it's fine," the way she might have once. She was 64 years old, and she had stopped issuing pardons for things that were not fine. 23 years, she said. "You didn't know my name." Gerald nodded. He did not argue. He did not explain. He nodded the way a person nods when the truth is plain, and there is nothing to add to it. "I know it now," he said. She looked at him. There was no cruelty in her expression. There was something harder than cruelty. There was clarity. The calm, unflinching kind that comes to people who have survived things that would have broken someone else. "What are you going to do about the east wing pipes?" she said. He blinked. "And the elevator," she said. "The North Tower. That part has been discontinued, but I looked it up last year. There's a company in Ohio that makes a compatible component. I wrote it down. Let me find the paper." She set down the sheet. She reached into the pocket of her uniform and produced a folded piece of paper that had clearly been in that pocket for some time. She handed it to him. He unfolded it. In careful handwriting, the same small, precise handwriting she had used for 30 years, were the company name, the part number, the contact name, and the phone number. Gerald Hargrove looked at the paper. He looked at the woman who had handed it to him. For a moment, the linen room was very quiet. "Opal," he said, "I'd like to offer you a position on the management team. Facilities and operations oversight. Real title, real salary." She considered this. "I'd want to negotiate the health benefits," she said. "Of course," he said, "and I'm not giving up the parking space I've had for 11 years. "Obviously." She nodded. "Then we can talk." The deal closed. The Hargrove was saved. Nakamura Capital Partners would renovate, not demolish. The licensing agreement had held, which meant the name had value, which meant the building would remain what it had always been, a hotel. Elliot Hargrove's marble floors would stay. The chandelier in the ballroom would stay. The crack in the ceiling would finally be repaired. And in the management offices on the 3rd floor, where the light came in slanted in the mornings through windows that faced east, a woman named Opal Tatum unpacked a photograph of her late husband. A drawing her grandson had made her when he was sick, and a small potted plant she had kept on the windowsill in the linen room for so long that the staff had stopped noticing it was there. She put the plant on her new windowsill. She sat down. She looked at the stack of facility reports waiting on her desk, and she thought about the East Wing, and the elevator, and the 17 other things she had written down in 11 years, of paying attention in rooms where nobody was paying attention to her. She picked up a pen. She got to work. "I have thought about Opal Tatum many times since I first heard this story. I think about her in the linen room on the morning of the closing, folding fitted sheets at 7 a.m., While 12 people on the 22nd floor negotiated the fate of the building, she had held together quietly for 23 years. I think about the fact that nobody knew her name. I think about how many people are in that building right now. Not that building specifically. Every building, every office, every hospital, every school, every organization that runs, because someone is paying attention in the margins, in the back stairwells, in the rooms where the people with the portfolios never go. We call people invisible when we mean we've made a choice not to look. Opal never stopped looking. She spent 2 decades watching, learning, noticing, writing things down on folded pieces of paper that she kept in her pocket because she believed, even when no one confirmed it, even when no one asked, that what she knew had value. She was right. She was always right. The only thing that changed was that someone finally stopped long enough to hear her.